normalize, to kind of mainstream this backroom contacts, and also this will enhance economic and security cooperation, of course. But will it lead to peace in the Middle East? Because Trump called it, that's what is going to happen. So I am skeptical about it, and I will tell you why I am skeptical. See, there are three factors. One, the Gulf countries are not frontline states in the conflict with Israel. Be it Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Oman, or the so-called Saudi bloc, except Qatar in the Gulf. They all are warming up to Israel. The only two countries have signed agreements now, but it's likely that Oman might follow suit. And then we might have to wait out till MBS becomes the king before he also signs a similar agreement with the Israelis. But these countries are not friendly. They are not directly involved in a conflict with Israel, and that is also because they had, it is also because of that they had established backroom contacts with these countries. So they had joined the wider Palestinian cause, ideologically or politically. They had joined the Palestinian cause, but while on the ground, in the practical sense, they were not part of the conflict. So an agreement between these two, it is significant because they are breaking with the Arab League, the so-called Arab League consensus. In 2002, the Saudi kingdom had proposed to the Arab League initiative, the Arab Peace Initiative, so in which the Arab countries offered recognition and normalization to Israel in return for an independent Palestinian state and the Israeli withdrawal from all the occupied territories, which they had occupied in 1967. So that is the Arab Peace Initiative. So these countries are now breaking with the Arab Peace Initiative, which means the Arab League consensus is crumbling. And the Arab countries are, the Gulf Arab countries are reaching out to Israel. So in that sense, it is very significant. But on the other side, since these countries are not directly involved in conflict with Israel, I don't know how far it can be called a peace agreement. It is more of a normalization agreement, establishment of diplomatic relationship than a conflict resolution or a peace agreement between the Arabs and the Israelis. That is one factor. Secondly, there are if you look at today's Middle East, so the sands are shifting very fast because there are now a tripolar contest in the Middle East. One is, of course, led by the Saudi bloc. Saudi Arabia is arguably the most powerful country in the Sunni Arab world, and it is also the Middle East's largest economy, the US ally, etc., etc. It's a very important power. So there is a bloc led by the Saudis, which is, predominantly the Sunni Gulf countries, except Qatar, and as well as the Muslim Brotherhood, as well as the anti-Muslim Brotherhood lobby in the region, including Egypt, and so on and so forth. And the second bloc is, of course, led by the Iranians. So it is kind of Iran, Syria, and their Shia alliance, Shia militias, including Hezbollah and the parties in Iraq, etc., etc. And the third one, an emerging bloc, is led by Turkey. Turkey is now slowly shifting towards the Middle East from the other side of the continent. So it's led by Turkey and largely supported by Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood parties in the region, which includes the government of officially the UN recognized government in Libya, Qatar, Turkey, and the Muslim Brotherhood parties. So there is a three-way contest in the region. So on top of it, the United States is slowly withdrawing from the region. It had pulled out troops from Syria, and it is withdrawing from Iraq. And clearly, if you look at larger geopolitics, the United States focus is shifting away from the Middle East towards Asia, towards East Asia, to deal with China. So it leaves a vacuum on the one side, and the three-way contest is emerging. So of course, there are security, concerns on all sides, on all three sides. So what the pro-American axis in the region, which includes both Israel and the Saudi blocs, what they see is that it suits their best interest to enhance cooperation, to normalize their relationship, to face the challenges those are emerging. The challenges that may include a more assertive and aggressive Iran on the one side, and a new bloc, a new power bloc emerging, led by Turkey. And this, coupled with the withdrawal of the United States, poses enormous security challenges as well as opportunities to these countries. So I think this is what prompted Israelis and the Arabs, the Sunni Arabs and the Gulf, come together, rather than any quest for bringing peace towards the region. And why it may not bring peace? Because the central problem of the Israel's conflict, or the Israeli-Arab conflict, is the Palestinian issue. This doesn't address the Palestinian issue at all. So in 1979, when Sadat reached out to the Israelis, 78 Sadat reached out to the Israelis, and the 1979 the Egypt-Israel peace agreement was signed. At that time, at least Sadat got the Middle East peace framework signed and approved by the Israelis, which means it was for the first time the Israelis accepted the Palestinian struggle for nationhood in 1979. In 1994, when the Jordanians, King Abdullah signed the agreement with the Israelis, and it came immediately after the Oslo Accords, because the Oslo Accords had set the stage for the Palestinian Authority to be formed, at least a provisional government with promises of full statehood, etc., in the future. But compared to the Jordanian and Egyptian agreements, what the Bahrainis and the Emiratis got this time is nothing. It is just a promise from the Israelis that they would suspend the annexation of the Jewish settlement on the West Bank. So the annexation hasn't happened. It was a threat that we were going to announce, and they stepped back from that threat. Not any actual concession on the ground. So the Palestinian issue, by and large, was left unaddressed in the Emirati-Bahraini agreements with the Israelis. So the issue remains unresolved. So which means the central question of the Arab-Israeli problem, that remains unresolved, and with the Sunni Arab countries withdrawing from the central issue, that leaves a vacuum which will be filled up by the emerging powers or the other blocs in the region. So yeah, to conclude, I don't think this will bring peace. But I think this is, if you look at it geopolitically and historically, it is an important, significant deal.
Thank you. No, the point that you raised in the second part of your note, Stanley, on Palestine, that this deal doesn't address Palestine issue. That the sentiment was, Palestine was an important issue for the Arab world in the 80s and the 90s. How important is Palestine issue to the Arab world now? Or, the larger question that I would want to pose you is, how important is Palestine to the larger Middle East peace? Is the issue that even today relevant as it was in the 80s and 90s?
Yeah. See, Shubha, I think the Arab, if you look at it, the Arab-Israeli conflict, in the Arab, one phase is gone. I mean, it's one page has turned in the Arab-Israeli conflict, because now you see 4 Arab countries have reached out to have established ties with Israel, and more Arab countries might follow, including Oman and Sudan. We are expecting that to happen before the November elections. So which also means that the Arab Peace Initiative, which I referred to earlier, the Arab Peace Initiative is kind of crumbling. So the collective Arab bargaining vis-a-vis Israel in return for a independent Palestinian state, I think that era is gone. But at the same time, the support for the Palestinian cause, the Palestinians among the Muslim countries in the Middle East, that remains strong. So while the Arab leadership is slowly moving away or slowly decoupling their own bilateral relationship with Israel from their overall support for the Palestinian cause, the issue is that this leaves, let's forget about the moral arguments. That let's say that all these countries were raising the Israeli issue out of their own interest. They have their own interests. So even if you look at that, while the Arab countries pull back from this, their collective support for the Palestinians, that leaves a vacuum. This vacuum, when I say that this will be filled up by the emerging powers, which means what I expect is that Iran is already supporting Hamas, and Iran is a vocal supporter of the Palestinians in the region. And that Turkey is also, while Turkey has established relationship, etc., bilateral relationship with Israel, but Turkey will take up this issue more aggressively, I think, in the coming years. So what we will see is that the Arabs so far had supported the Palestinian cause in the region, in the Arab League, in the international fora, etc., etc. But while they supported it is a very complex relationship, right? Now it is it's 2020, exactly 50 years ago. King Hussein of Jordan, uh, was practically had unleashed violence on extreme violence on the Palestinian guerrillas in Jordan, in Amman. So it is the 50th year now, the Black September. So it is a very complex relationship because the Palestinians, while the Arab countries had supported the Palestinians in international fora, in the Arab League, in the region, etc., etc., while at the same time also they had a very complicated relationship with the PLO, with Yasser Arafat, because King Hussein expelled Yasser Arafat from Amman. He went to Lebanon, and the Israelis went after him, and he was expelled from Lebanon as well, and he had to shift his base to Tunis. So it is not a blanket support which even the Arab countries have given, but still the support for the Palestinians remained high on their foreign policy agenda. But I think it is no longer. If you look at Arab collective, Arab foreign policy in one collective, it is no longer. But what I expect is that in the region, in the Middle East, the Iranians and the Turks and the Qataris. You see the Qatari Emir speech which he gave at the UN yesterday, that because he knew that there is an opportunity with the Emiratis reaching out to Israel. So he knew that the public opinion in the region is still, because the public opinion is overwhelmingly supportive of the Palestinians. So Turkey also sees the Palestinian cause, because Turkey, which is now, which is becoming very active, geopolitically active in its neighborhood, especially in Eastern Mediterranean and in the Middle East. Erdogan with his own ambitions, with on geopolitical ambitions. So it's becoming very geopolitically active in both sides of the Turkish Republic. So Turkey will also see the Palestinian cause, a very important political vehicle for Turkey to exert its influence throughout the region. So what we will likely see is that while the Arab support, the traditional Arab support, the support from the states, support from the political leaderships decline, support from other blocs for the Palestinians in the Middle East will likely to go up. So the issue will remain active.
Thank you. Thank you. Sabrina, do you have a point for Stanley?
Yeah, I just have two questions for you. The first one, what struck me immediately that after the deal is the timing of the deal. It just comes 2 months before the elections is going to happen in US. So if I have to put a question to you, how do you see the deal, or rather contextualize the deal in the current US presidential elections? And my corollary question to that is, whatever happens in November, whether Joe Biden wins or Trump wins, we know that Trump has been a great ally for strong leaders, whether it's MBS or El Sisiri in Middle East. So, how do you see, like, after the election, what is going to happen to the Middle East politics, depending on who is going to come to power? So these are the two questions I have from my side.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So in the context of the US presidential election, we can say that it is a rare diplomatic victory for President Trump, in a sense that he brought these two sides, come together and normalize their relationship. And it is rare because Trump's diplomatic bets had all either backfired or are stagnant, because his maximum pressure policy towards Iran, in my personal opinion, was disastrous. And because he wanted to kill off a nuclear deal which was functioning, and then which reproduced, which backfired, deepening the security issues in the region. His decision to unilaterally pull the United States out of the Iran nuclear deal. And secondly, his bet on North Korea has not produced any tangible diplomatic outcome. So it's going on and on. He went to North Korea. He met Kim Jong-un a couple of times, 3 times to be specific, but nothing has come of it. So compared to that, when the elections are with the elections a few weeks away or a few months away, so Trump could claim that he got a diplomatic victory. And it is also important because if you look at what Trump called the deal of the century or whatever, the agreement which Jared Kushner proposed, the agreement, it is overwhelmingly supportive of the Israelis if you read the fine document, because it was asking the Palestinians to accept the Israeli settlements within the West Bank, and in return for the guarantee that Israel would give land, a kind of a land swap. They would give other land from the Israeli territories for a swap towards the West Bank territories that the Palestinians would lose, etc., etc. And also, there is no immediate guarantee for a statehood. Israel would continue to control security matters. Israel will continue to control airspace, maritime space, etc. So that is the Trump deal, which the Palestinians rejected outright. And there is no peace process also. There are no talks going on between the Palestinians and the Israelis. So the Jared Kushner plan for peace between the Palestinians and Israelis didn't actually take off. So it couldn't even get the Palestinians on the table because the deal was, it was skewed towards Israel. And it is hardly surprising because the Trump administration, even before Trump unveiled the plan, had recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, which the Palestinians saw, a stab on their back. So in that sense, they didn't even get both sides to talk. So what the Trump administration did was that they enjoy very good ties with the Sunni kingdoms, especially the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and etc. So they reached out to them. They asked them, then if the Palestinians are not coming forward for talks, since you already have established backroom contacts with the Israelis, why don't you go ahead with normalizing ties with them? And there are objective factors as well. This is one subjective argument from the Trump administration because Trump wanted something before the elections. And the objective factors, as we discussed earlier, was that the United States is slowly retreating from the region. So the American allies on both sides of the aisle, both the Israelis as well as the Emiratis, the Saudis. So they have to, improve their cooperation, strategic cooperation, security cooperation, economic cooperation, etc. And then secondly, the common Iran threat is there because both the Israelis as well as the Saudis now see Iran as their primary enemy in the region. So these are the objective conditions. And then the Trump administration has subjective stake in it as well. So that administration's argument was that, yeah, now that we are leaving the region, it is imperative for you guys to, strengthen your cooperation. And the Saudis were, as if you look at the Wall Street Journal report, the Saudis were also very receptive to the agreement. MBS wanted an agreement with the Israelis. And then he kept the entire, UAE deal away from the king, who was 84, King Salman bin Abdulaziz, who was 84, and then undergoing some treatment. So he kept the UAE deal away from him, and the king came to know about it only when the deal was announced to the public, only when the deal was tweeted out by Trump. And the king was furious. And he called Trump. He called Trump and told him that this is not done. And under no circumstances, as long as I am the king, the Saudi Arabia is not going to reach an agreement with the Israelis. So, and then the king also, reiterated Saudi's support for the Arab Peace Initiative. So MBS apparently called up Kushner and told him that he's helpless. He can't do anything about it, as the king is very angry with me. So as a consolation prize, I can give you Bahrain. Because the Bahrainis, they usually take the foreign policy decisions are usually taken in Riyadh, and the Bahrainis do it, at least since 2011. So this was the deal. So the UAEs reached out to Israelis with support from Saudi Arabia, and the Bahrainis were brought into it by the Saudis. The Saudis are also on this side, on their side. So what might happen is that the king is ailing, he is 84, and MBS might become king in the near future. As once that happens, the Saudis may also do the same thing. So in that context, I think what Trump administration or President Donald Trump can claim prior diplomatic victory, and the administration's relationship with the personal relationships with the Saudis, the Emiratis, or the other Gulf countries in the region, it has kind of paid off. And then secondly, what will happen? Yeah, whatever happens to the election, one thing is sure, that is the United States is slowly withdrawing from, it is no longer the post-war world. It is no longer the post-war Middle East. The United States would try or would look towards, lightening its presence in the region, whether it is Trump or Biden. And then how they will be doing it could be different, because I think if Biden becomes the president, it is possible that the Biden administration would reach out to the Iranians, because Biden was the vice president of the Obama administration, which actually signed the agreement with the Iranians, right? And Iran's demand is that the United States should restore the agreement. And you can see that despite all pressure the Trump administration has put on the other signatories of the Iran nuclear deal, nobody has actually withdrawn from the agreement. Neither the Europe, nor Russians, the Chinese. So the deal may not be a functioning one as of now, but still the deal is standing from an international point of view. The United States is isolated. So it is very likely that a Biden administration could join the agreement, could rejoin the agreement, and then take the negotiations to the next level or whatever. So which means Iran, the sanctions on Iran, American sanctions on Iran could be lifted, or at least the intensity could be reduced. And Iran would be allowed once again to join the economic and political mainstream of the region, which is also a factor that is bringing the Emiratis and the Israelis together, because they see that if Trump doesn't become the president, the possibility of Iran being brought back into the political mainstream, which means the three-way contest which we discussed in the region could be sharpened. The contradictions could be sharpened. So they need allies. And if Trump becomes the president again, I think Trump would push for more Arab countries which have good ties with the Americans to reach out to the Israelis. So even in that case, I think this tripolar contest will be more sharpened. So in either scenario, you don't see actual peace coming to the Middle East.
Thank you. Lokendra, you want to pose a question to Stanley?
Yes, sir. So I have two questions. The first is that, so there have been reports of US selling F-35 jets to UAE, and that this arms deal was an inducement to UAE for the Abraham Accord. So do you think that Israel will let this happen, given that Israel always wants to maintain a qualitative edge over other Gulf states in the region? My second question is, do you think that this realignment that is happening in West Asia with this deal is going to solidify the Turkey, Qatar, Iran axis? These are my two questions.
Going to, sorry, I didn't get the second one. Going to?
Whether it would strengthen Turkey-Qatar relationship.
Yeah. So quickly, F-35, Israel would continue to oppose the F-35 deal, because the Prime Minister Netanyahu has already said that he won't accept, or he would oppose the Americans selling F-35 to the UAE. But you never know, because Trump is driven by business rather than ideology or history. So you can't say what will happen. Anyway, the Americans had sent F-15 to the Gulf states earlier, had sold F-16 to Gulf states earlier. So yeah, as of now, the Trump administration says there is no agreement. There is no, consensus on whether F-35 should be sold to the Emiratis. But you never know what would happen if Trump is re-elected. I won't rule that out completely, because when it comes to business, Trump, I found, is more of a practical man than an ideological president. And secondly, yeah, of course, this would strengthen the Qatar-Turkey Muslim Brotherhood alliance. That's the whole point. It would strengthen, more than it would strengthen, what I find is that the objective conditions for or the contradictions between this three blocs in the region would be sharpened with the realignment that is currently underway in the region. Because the Middle East, historically, you see the Middle East has always, at certain junctures of history, such realignments had happened in the Middle East. Immediately after the Cold War, Egypt was on the other side. Egypt was the leader of the Arab world under Jamal Abdel Nasser. And then Egypt was an ally of the Soviets as well. And then Egypt crossed over. Egypt became an ally of the Americans under Anwar Sadat. Egypt had also reached out to Israel. And Egypt lost its historical appeal, where Saudi Arabia has emerged. Until 1979 Iranian Revolution, the Saudis and the Iranians were the two pillars of American foreign policy in the Muslim world. And in 1979, the Americans lost the Iranians. The Iranians went to the other side, to the extreme other side. So this kind of realignment, historical realignments had happened in the Middle East's history for a long time. So what we now see, the two major, I think, history shaping events is that one is Turkey is swinging back to the Middle East. And then secondly, Iran is becoming more and more aggressive in the region. So these factors, I think, would continue to shape Middle Eastern politics.
Thank you. Thank you, Stanley. Two more questions. I'll ask Rashmi.
Yes, sir. So I had two questions. Should I ask the two or should I just
Please go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you said that Iran and Turkey, which are non-Arab Muslim countries, they're becoming very vocal about the Palestine issue right now. So who do you think is going to fill the vacuum that's left by the Arab countries in the Palestine issue? Is there going to be a contestation, as in not physically, literally, in the diplomatic sense, or in the backside channel? Is there going to be a contestation between Iran and Turkey to fill that position and take that leadership in the Palestine issue? That's my first question. Second one is you mentioned that this agreement and there's more of a normalization of relations with Israel rather than conflict resolution. So if at all Israel goes ahead with the annexation plan that it had put forward, now it says that it's on hold, but then it's still on the table. So what, according to you, may be the response from the Arab states which are normalizing relations with Israel? So where is the two-state debate heading to? Thank you.
Yeah. So first of all, I think, the support from both the blocs towards the Palestinians, those are different. Like, in a sense, the Turks would offer political support because Turkey, geopolitically, if you look at Turkey and Iran is seen as a pariah state by the West. Iran is kind of, the Americans call Iran supporter of terrorism. Sanctions are there. The regime is weak. So Iran would offer kind of, what is a discrete support. Iran is supporting Hamas. They say, the Americans say Iran is supplying weapons and other support to Hamas and Palestinian guerrillas, and Iran is supporting Islamic Jihad as well. So Iran would, besides the political, being vocal for the Palestinians in international organizations, Iran would continue to support Hamas and other groups, while Turkey's support would be more political, because there are two things. One is Hamas, which controls Gaza. Hamas is an offshoot of, the Muslim Brotherhood. The political ideology, it belongs to the larger Muslim Brotherhood family. And AK party of Erdogan, which rules Turkey, which has been in power since 2002, is also an offshoot of Muslim Brotherhood. So there is ideological convergence between Hamas and the AK party, the Justice and Development Party of Erdogan. So what you see, I think, is that both powers would support the Palestinian cause, and both would use the Palestinian cause for their own geopolitical benefits in the region. But the support would be different, So that is one thing. And these two sides, I don't see any alignment between the Turks and the Iranians, because there are serious differences between these two sides as well. Because you see, for example, take the case of Syria. In Syria, the Iranians are supporting the regime. They fought on behalf of the regime since 2011. While on the other side, Turkey has its own, proxy rebels fighting in northeastern Syria. So Turkey has also carved up, a bit of Syria and is controlling that region through its proxies. So they don't see eye to eye. So there are serious differences between the Iranians and the Turks. So it would remain a three-way contest. There won't be, I don't see any alignment, at least in the foreseeable future, between these three blocs in the region. And secondly, the annexation, I think the Israelis would go ahead with the annexation, maybe after the election. If Trump is re-elected, there won't be any international pressure on the Israelis. So for now, Trump doesn't want that to happen. It's an election year. There would be a blowback. But under a Biden administration, Biden is also very pro-Israel when you look at his foreign policy proposals. But there would be, at least there would be pressure with regard to annexing the Palestinian territories. If Biden becomes, I hope so, I think so, I'm not certain, but my gut feeling is that the Israelis would, because you look at the political composition of the Netanyahu government, barring the blue and white party of Benny Gantz, it is supported by all the right-wing, right religious parties, the Jewish Orthodox parties. And they want the annexation to happen. So as regards Netanyahu is concerned, the annexation is linked to his political survival. And Benny Gantz also, he is opposed to annexation now because he says the government's focus should be on tackling COVID rather than annexing the settlements. But he is not ideologically or politically opposed to the idea of annexation as such. So objectively, if you look at the matter, if Donald Trump is re-elected, the Israelis are likely to go ahead with the annexation. And I think, and the Arabs won't do anything. They can't do anything. They would practically do nothing. They hadn't done anything, for the last many, many years with regard to the occupation is concerned. And the two-state solution, two-state solution, I think, is dead if it's not dying. It is very difficult to find the two-state solution given the current complexities of the Israeli-Palestinian equation, because once the annexation has also happened, it would be very difficult to find two-state solution. How are you going to find the Palestinian? Because we are talking about 500,000 Jews are living in the West Bank now, and 400,000 Jews are living in East Jerusalem. So East Jerusalem is already annexed, and if the West Bank territories are also annexed, there would be practically left nothing for the Palestinians in the West Bank. East Jerusalem is already gone. So what two-state solution you are? How are you going to demarcate the boundary? Everybody is talking about 1967 boundary, and 1967 boundary has long been dead. If you actually on the ground, the 1967 boundary doesn't work at all. Two-state solution, I think it is not. Everybody remains committed to two-state solution. Even Netanyahu is committed to two-state solution. Why? Because everybody knows that the two-state solution is not functional at all.
Thank you. One last question, Stanley. Harini?
Yeah.
My question's from the economic sector. The deal is being projected also as a massive opportunity for economic exchange between in the region. So how much of this, how much of an economic overlap can we expect from this deal? And will it be long term, or for a very few months and then it will just fizzle out?
Yeah. So I'm not an expert on this. I'm not an economist, but my layman's understanding suggests me that there would be opportunities for both, because the Emiratis would like to make investments, and then one sector is tourism, but on the other side, the Emiratis would like to make investments in Israel, and Israeli businessmen also would like to come and set up shops in Dubai. So somebody was telling me, one ambassador was telling me the other day that the UAE has already invited the Israelis to come to the next UAE Expo, the trade expo. Even before the agreement was signed, they had already invited the Israelis. So Israelis are very keen to go to Dubai. So in that sense, I think, of course, there would be economic cooperation. Both sides would deep. And Bahrain is, it is just a consolation prize. Bahrain doesn't hold any geopolitical, this in the whole scheme of things. But the agreement with UAE and Israel would certainly have its, I think, serious economic impact. And more than that, there would be, I think, intelligence cooperation. And both sides would use the agreement. They will have embassies on both sides. There will be, they can travel freely. Unlike in the past, earlier, even if you wanted to go to Israel from India, you will have to go via Moscow or Istanbul or whatever. Now that's not needed. You can fly over the Saudi UAE airspace directly towards Israel. So all that things will happen. So life between the people of two sides will be a bit more normal, and business ties would deepen. Intelligence cooperation would get strengthened, etc., etc. That would happen.
Thank you, Stanley. Thank you for spending your morning with us. So this we are trying new, getting experts to come and talk to us and explain what's happening. We are also in the process of strengthening our global politics. The course. One question that repeatedly came. Maybe we'll come back to you later sometime next week or the following week. There have been a lot of references to Turkey. What Turkey is doing in the Middle East, Iran, North Africa, Libya, and then Turkey is also trying to be a European player. So looks like ideologically it is oriented towards East and physically oriented towards West. And then there are also statements on not only Palestine and Jammu and Kashmir. What does Turkey want? Maybe we'll come back to you later. I think we need a full 30 minutes Q&A with you. Sometime next week, Stanley, if you give me some time, we will bother you once again.
Sure.
Thanks again, Stanley, for joining us. We will send you the YouTube link. We'll be uploading it. Once it's ready, I'll send you. Thanks again for helping us with understanding.
Thank you.
We always read your writings. And that note on Taliban was well written, Stanley.
Thank you.
Hopefully we see you sometime in NIAS. Come and spend a couple of days with us when COVID is over.
Sure.
Thank you, Stanley, on behalf of
Thank you. Thank you.
Harini, you can end the session.